working through the next stage of the project, about early 80s, the funding was approved. And then, you know, not long after that I got involved, so I have some memories of some of this now, but I remember one of the big issues was where we're going to put the building.
Right.
Because a buffalo jump by definition has so much rugged topography, and you want people to see and experience all of it. And I remember coming down here with architects and yourself and Dr. Fritz Pennicook, and we looked at the different landscapes and we look at the little coulees, because we always wanted to hide the building. We never wanted it to stand out. That was an intent from the beginning. And we looked at these saying, yeah, we could put a nice little building in there, tuck it in, and you'd hardly see it. And the same up top. There's some places, even though it's up high, there's some places that are nestled into the landscape where you could fit a building nicely. And every time we do that, we'd come away scratching our head saying, yeah, but the problem, if you do it that, then they can't get up there and get that feeling of being on top of the cliff. And this was the last things the buffalo saw. And if we put it on top of the cliff, we can't get them to the bottom and say, and here's where all the killing and butchering took place, and the pandemonium and everything and the excitement. And that was a real stumbling block for us for a long time, until this very ingenious solution came along.
And it's funny, we were fortunate in a number of ways that it resolved itself the way it did. Not the least of which was that at that time, the fellow in charge of capital construction for the province of Alberta was a fellow named Tony Hargraves, working for what was then called the Department of Public Works. And Tony was extremely sympathetic to what we were trying to do here. So he had far more tolerance than you sometimes run into in these situations as we worked our way through this thing. And when the solution finally came up through many, many discussions, when we finally hit on the idea of basically burying the thing in the face of the cliff with an access at the lower level and an access at the upper, or an egress really, I guess, at the upper level, that would allow easy movement of people from the top to the bottom, and at the same time keep the whole thing basically hidden from view. Tony was extremely positive on this thing, and bear in mind that his job was to bring things in at the least possible cost. And so interestingly enough, he's the guy that figured out the best rationale for this from his perspective, from a cost perspective. And that was fundamentally that even though they paid a bit of a premium on the construction costs, Tony figured out that they would very quickly actually recover those costs on the operating side. Because by burying the building in the way that they did into the cliff face, it had a huge impact on both the heating and the cooling requirements. Right. This thing is so energy efficient in comparison to buildings of comparable size, it's a joke. And he was able to convince his superiors that this was the right thing to do, even from an economic perspective. So that was a big plus in the whole thing that gave us a boost in getting this proper solution.
And the actual cost of putting it into the ground and burying it really wasn't all that. It wasn't as much more as many of us thought.
No,
it turned out to be about $500,000 more expensive, which is really not in the big picture of things all that much more money.
And it did exactly what it was supposed to do. I can still remember. You mentioned that one of our issues right from the start was trying to keep this thing as unobtrusive as possible. I mean, you don't start with a vista like this and the cliff setting and all this sort of thing, and then promptly, you know, muck it all up with things that are clearly out of context. So this whole business of trying to keep it as low profile as possible was huge. And I can still remember, we were well into the construction phase by this time, and there'd been a fair amount of publicity in the local press, well actually in the provincial press generally, on the progress of this thing. And I got a phone call one day in my office from an irate citizen who'd driven up the road. He said he'd come up the road here just to have a look at the construction, because, you know, he'd read all this stuff about what was going on. And he was just absolutely outraged. He said, I drove all the way up and down that road and there's no construction project there. You can't see anything. And I can still remember saying, sir, you have made my day. Yeah. Because it was exactly what we would hope would happen, was that the thing became so unobtrusive that it just simply did not stand out from the rest of the background.
That even continued a little bit, because after after official opening, it was a little while before we got all the signage up. And we had other complaints from people who had driven right by it. Completely missed it. So as it turned out, I recall that we instructed the architect to expose no more than 10% of the actual superstructure itself. So 90% of the building is underground. And as you say, it seems to have worked. It's It leaked a little.
Yes.
We've had some water in it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that was, you know, they keep chipping away at trying to fix that.
I was
And
chuckling today, even having a look out at the upper level there. You can see all the silicone on some of the glass panes there, because it gets a fair snow load at times in the winter.
It does.
And so
There's
that's
places
a
where it
problem.
drifts, packs up against it. There are a few
Yeah.
design flaws
Yeah.
that we probably do differently today.
Yeah.
But overall, it's worked really well.
Absolutely.